So, just like almost every pure-blooded Viltrumite, Conquest was born thousands of years ago on Viltrum. Being raised on the planet of cruel conquerors likely darkened his heart from a young age. Conquest fought in and survived the Viltrumite Civil War, and later fought for Viltrum in the Empire's expansion. However, the enemies of the Viltrumites eventually found a way to hurt them by creating a virus, known as the Scourge virus, which infected the entire population, killing them off in droves every year for decades. Conquest was one of the few who survived the virus, but found that for a brief period of time he was temporarily weakened, and during this time his right arm was torn off and his right eye was scarred and blinded by a Rognar. Later, his right arm was replaced by a prosthetic, and by the time the virus had run its course, the Viltrumite population had dwindled to only a few dozen. The remaining Viltrumites changed their strategy by creating a new method of conquering worlds by sending one Viltrumite to a planet to gradually weaken its defenses. Conquest was thus sent to assimilate planets and was apparently the most successful of all the Viltrumites, never failing once. It is also implied that he committed countless horrific atrocities single-handedly during this time. According to Nolan, Conquest's mindset became more irrational and unstable, and he became this rabid, bloodlust individual who sought only the thrill of combat and the blood of enemies spaced across the battlefield, and he began to not care about his empire. Conquest eventually was sent to Earth to check on Mark's progress. Mark had previously been chosen to be the Viltrumite agent of Earth, although he had no plans of fulfilling his mission. The Viltrumites were planning to use Earth as a breeding camp to rebuild their population, since human DNA was almost completely compatible with Viltrumite DNA. Conquest was sent specifically due to his record of never failing to assimilate planets and the likelihood that Mark would resist. So Conquest arrived in the immediate aftermath of the Invincible War and found Earth in ruins. The news reports about what happened in the Invincible War. Many cities were leveled and thousands were killed. Savage Dragon is interviewed and says that the Mark from their reality is not responsible for what happened. Meanwhile, Mark watches in horror as Eve clings to her life in a coma. Cecil arrives to ask Mark for help in the cleanup effort. Mark accepts but says that he will not work for Cecil again. The various superheroes help with the cleanup of Manhattan and begin saving those who survived the aftermath. Mark begins helping with the cleanup effort and notices many dead bodies, deepening his depression. Then, an aged Viltrumite arrives on the scene to inform Mark of his Viltrumite duties. The Viltrumite reveals his name to be Conquest, and he reminds Mark that if he does not take over the planet, he will be replaced, and if he resists, he will be killed. Mark tells him that it isn't a good time. Conquest responds that the Viltrum Empire knew of Mark's resistance, which is why they sent Conquest specifically. He tells Mark that he has never failed in conquering a planet and Mark will die if he fights back. Mark responds that he has been waiting for someone to fight as an outlet for his rage. So the duo charge into each other, causing a large shockwave around the area. As Mark and Conquest charge into each other, the shockwave causes a large amount of debris to rise up and threaten the nearby relief workers. Conquest easily overpowers Mark, crashing him through a building. He tells him that while Anissa would be emphasizing the stupidity of trying to stop the Viltrumites from making Earth their planet, Conquest doesn't care about Earth or adding it to the Viltrumite Empire. He simply enjoys unmitigated violence and is usually forbidden from unleashing his full destructive capabilities until now. Mark uses the opportunity to punch him, but Conquest isn't affected and simply smiles. Mark becomes angry and rushes into him, sending him through a building. Conquest lifts the debris and holds Mark by his neck with one arm. Mark smashes his fist on Conquest's temple. Conquest smiles and replies, "Very good." Mark punches him again and it launches him into orbit. Conquest smiles again and charges back to the stratosphere and collides with Mark. Mark is able to break his hold this time, reminding Conquest that he already used that trick. Conquest states enough games and punches Mark in the eye hard enough to break one of his monocles. Mark flies down at a fast speed while Conquest pummels him. Mark holds hand over his eye, which is severely bruised from Conquest's punch. Oliver, Debbie, and her boyfriend Paul witness Mark's battle on the news. Oliver rushes to help him, worrying Debbie, but Paul assures her that the duo can handle the battle. Oliver attempts to catch up to Conquest and Mark, but the duo are moving too fast. Mark attempts to talk with Conquest, but Conquest refuses to stop since he's genuinely enjoying the battle. Oliver ambushes him, and Conquest demands to know who he is. Mark rushes to save Oliver and throws him aside so he can escape. Conquest pushes Mark down with his elbow at his neck. Mark headbutts Conquest, much to his amusement. He catches Mark's last punch and says, if this is all the strength he has, he will likely die. Under the Pentagon, Cecil learns of the battle and rushes to see if D.A. Sinclair has the 4 alternate marks ready as reanimin. Sinclair informs him that their dense tissue makes him unable to cut through to make the reanimin process. Cecil looks in horror, stating, then God help us all. Adam and Betsy Wilkins watch the news by Eve as she wakes up. The news mistakenly believes Conquest to be Omni-Man. Eve wakes up after 2 days of being in a coma, asking where Mark is. She sees Mark fighting on TV and rushes to ready to help, and she accidentally reveals his identity as Invincible. Eve tells a doctor to get Cecil to transport her to the battle. Conquest tosses Mark around effortlessly and reveals that he met his father while Nolan was younger, showing that he is much older than Nolan. Oliver interrupts again and catches him off guard and helps Mark up. Oliver uses Conquest's advanced age as a reason they can beat him. Conquest argues that him being old doesn't mean you should underestimate him. He swats Mark away to fight Oliver. He punches Oliver, making him lose many teeth and breaks his arm. Conquest attempts to rip him in half, but Mark stops him. He goes back to fighting Mark, and Cecil has a med team pick up Oliver. A concerned Debbie learns that Oliver is alive and Paul comforts her. William, Rick, Amber Bennett, Gary, and Art watch in horror as Mark is overwhelmed by Conquest. Conquest launches him into a destroyer ship over an island. Mark punches Conquest and Eve arrives to assist Mark, much to Mark's horror. Mark attempts to hold him off, but Conquest breaks Mark's leg, causing him to shriek in pain. Eve holds Conquest in a bubble, but he easily breaks out of it. Conquest easily pummels Eve and impales her. Conquest laughs in Mark's face and Mark promises that he will kill Conquest. Conquest tells Mark to do his worst and the duo charge into one another. The duo punch one another, causing Mark to break his forearm and Conquest's cybernetic arm to be destroyed from the impact. An amused Conquest is distracted and Mark attacks him. Conquest attempts to bear hug Mark, but Mark bites him, tearing off his muscle tissue. While Conquest and Mark fight, Eve wakes up from her near-death state and rebuilds her body. Mark pummels Conquest until he is distracted by Eve's revival. Conquest punches him while he is distracted and Eve fires a beam of energy at Conquest, burning much of his skin. A naked Eve loses consciousness and Conquest goes to kill Eve. Mark stops him and begins to pummel Conquest, saying that he won't touch Eve. He catches his punch and breaks Mark's hand, causing him to scream in pain. An amused Conquest laughs as Mark is in pain, but Mark headbutts Conquest to the point where his face is disfigured. Mark loses consciousness and sees a naked and unconscious Eve. Mark tells Eve that he loves her with her returning it. Just then, the Guardians of the Globe, Youngblood, Savage Dragon, and various Image Comics superheroes arrive to the scene to transport them. After 3 days, Mark wakes up from his coma after being patched up from having his forearm broken, hand broken, skull fractured, and his leg broken. Eve visits him, relieved to see him awake. She asks if he remembers what happened. The thought of it makes him cry, and how he thought she died. She reveals to Mark that with emotional trauma, she can use her powers on living, organic matter, overriding the mental blocks installed in her brain by the government. She reveals that it happened to her before. Mark notices the incident had increased Eve's bust size, and this leads to an intimate moment. Mark and Eve's intimate moment is interrupted by Debbie and Paul. Eve wipes her lips and apologizes. Debbie sees Mark and begins to cry, telling Mark that he doesn't need to be a superhero anymore. Debbie leaves with Paul, and Cecil enters. He asks Mark to talk, and Mark asks where Conquest is. Cecil shows him the dead body. Mark sees the body and goes back to Eve. Mark goes to see Oliver, but Eve tells him that she can't go with him. She informs him that Rex's funeral is happening. Mark asks to come along and she accepts. Mark, Eve, and various Image Comics superheroes including Robot, Bulletproof, Brit, Capes, The Immortal, Duplicate, Savage Dragon, Super Patriot, Donald Ferguson, Black Samson, and various others. In order to gather more information about the Viltrumites, Cecil Stedman devised an elaborate plan involving Conquest's apparent death. Knowing that Invincible would need reassurance that his most dangerous foe was truly gone, Cecil had a fake copy of Conquest's body created. The decoy was carefully designed to resemble the real thing, fooling even those closest to the battle. After the brutal fight that left Invincible nearly dead, Cecil encased what was believed to be Conquest's corpse in a massive, heavily fortified prison, a 400-ton containment structure buried deep within the Mojave Desert. The facility was designed to ensure that, even if there was any remaining life in the body, there would be no possibility of escape. However, the reality was far more dire than anyone anticipated. Conquest, despite suffering catastrophic injuries, was far from dead. His Viltrumite physiology, combined with his sheer resilience and will to fight, allowed him to heal at an astonishing rate. After several days of lying dormant within his prison, his body had fully regenerated. Once he regained his strength, Conquest wasted no time in making his next move. Demonstrating his overwhelming power, he easily shattered the reinforced structure that had been designed to contain him. The massive desert prison crumbled as Conquest emerged unscathed, launching himself into the sky. With terrifying speed, he broke through the Earth's atmosphere and disappeared into the depths of space, leaving no doubt that he was far from finished. Conquest set a direct course for the nearest Viltrumite warship, where he would report back to the leader of the Viltrumite Empire, Grand Regent Thrag. Upon his arrival, the atmosphere aboard the warship was tense. The Viltrumites valued strength above all else, and failure, especially in a mission as critical as Earth's conquest, was not taken lightly. As he stepped aboard, Conquest was met by Craig, a high-ranking Viltrumite officer. Craig immediately ordered him to bow before the Grand Regent, a sign of submission that Conquest, despite his pride, did not resist. Standing before Thrag, Conquest gave his report. He admitted his failure to complete his mission. He had not only been unable to kill Invincible, but he had also suffered severe injuries at the young half-Viltrumite's hands. The admission of failure did not sit well with Thrag. The Grand Regent was a ruler who had spent thousands of years maintaining the iron grip of the Viltrumite Empire, and he had little patience for weakness. With a cold, calculating gaze, Thrag compared Conquest to a mere animal, one that had outlived its usefulness. In Viltrumite culture, failure was often met with death, and it seemed, for a moment, that Conquest's time had come. However, Thrag was not a ruler who wasted valuable assets unnecessarily. Though he saw Conquest's failure as disgraceful, he recognized that the veteran warrior still had his uses. Rather than executing him on the spot, Thrag instead gave Conquest a new mission, one that would serve as both a redemption and a final test of his worth. He was to return to Earth with a single objective: to finish what he started. His orders were explicit: kill Invincible, kill Nolan Grayson, and eradicate anyone who stood with the coalition of planets. This was more than just an assignment, it was a declaration of war. Thrag was sending Conquest back as an executioner, tasked with eliminating all resistance to the Viltrumite Empire's expansion. Accepting his orders without hesitation, Conquest once again prepared for battle. His encounter with Invincible had been unexpected, but now he knew what to expect. With his body fully healed and his bloodlust stronger than ever, he relished the thought of returning to Earth. As the war between the Viltrumites and the coalition of planets escalated, Conquest led the charge alongside two fellow Viltrumite warriors, Lucan and an unnamed elite. Their mission was clear: crush the coalition's resistance and reassert the dominance of the Viltrumite Empire. With unmatched ferocity, Conquest tore through a coalition spaceship, his mere presence instilling fear among the defenders. Having survived his previous battle with Invincible, he fully expected his foe to be dead. However, as he entered the battlefield, he quickly realized that fate had given him another opportunity to finish what he had started. Upon seeing Conquest, Oliver Grayson, Invincible's younger brother, immediately charged at him. However, Oliver was no match for the seasoned Viltrumite warlord. With a casual yet devastating swipe, Conquest sent Oliver hurtling away like an insect. Before Conquest could continue his assault, Nolan Grayson attacked with full force, colliding with Conquest in a brutal mid-air strike. Despite the sheer power of Nolan's charge, Conquest recovered almost instantly. He retaliated with a vicious headbutt, smashing Nolan's skull and sending him reeling. Before Conquest could press his advantage, Invincible intervened. Mark flew into a rage, pummeling Conquest with a series of devastating blows. The old warrior, however, was unfazed. With a powerful backhand, he sent Invincible crashing through the air. Determined to finish the fight, Conquest launched himself forward, closing the distance between them in an instant. As they clashed once more, Invincible, bewildered by Conquest's resilience, demanded to know how he was still alive. With a cruel smile, Conquest revealed that he had been imprisoned but had managed to escape, proving once again that nothing could hold him back for long. Without wasting another moment, he drove his fist into Invincible's face, sending him flying. However, Invincible retaliated just as quickly, landing a brutal counterpunch. The battle was momentarily interrupted as a Viltrumite-impressed alien race arrived, further escalating the conflict. Seeing the growing chaos, Oliver realized that he couldn't hold his breath in space indefinitely and made a desperate retreat toward a nearby unknown planet. Sensing an opportunity, Conquest delivered another devastating punch to Invincible before taking off in pursuit of Oliver, determined to eliminate him. However, Invincible refused to let Conquest escape. With unmatched speed, he caught up to the older Viltrumite and tackled him, dragging both of them down to the planet's surface. The impact of their landing shattered the terrain, and without hesitation, Invincible attempted to suffocate Conquest by locking him in a crushing grip. Conquest, never one to accept defeat, fought back ferociously. He propelled them both into space, attempting to shake Invincible off by crashing through the mountains and flying at incredible speeds. But Mark refused to let go, tightening his hold with every second. Realizing that he was running out of options, Conquest resorted to sheer brutality. With a monstrous punch, he drove his fist into Invincible's stomach and, in a final act of desperation, disemboweled him, tearing into his torso with raw, savage strength. Blood gushed from Mark's body, and yet even in his severely injured state, he did not let go. With his grip tightening even further, Conquest's struggles became weaker and weaker. The mighty warrior who had survived countless battles, who had been the terror of civilizations, and who had defied death time and time again, was finally suffocated to death in Mark's unrelenting grasp. After the blood-soaked battle, the dust settled. Conquest's lifeless body lay on the battlefield, a relic of a bygone era. Despite the immense suffering he had caused, Omni-Man, who had fought alongside him in the past and knew his strength firsthand, chose to honor him. He decided to bury the fallen Viltrumite, recognizing him as one of the greatest warriors of their race. As Nolan dug the grave, Oliver, still enraged by Conquest's actions, could not understand why his father would show such respect to someone so cruel. But Nolan, reflecting on the history they shared, explained that Conquest, though a monster in his later years, had once been a great warrior. His path had been lost, consumed by bloodlust and the thrill of battle, but there was a time when he had embodied the very essence of what it meant to be Viltrumite. In many ways, Nolan admitted, Conquest had been a greater warrior than he himself ever was. With that, the legacy of Conquest came to an end, not as a hero, nor as a villain, but as a warrior whose time had passed. He was a relic of the old Viltrumite Empire, a force of nature that could not be controlled, and in his final moments, he met his ultimate fate at the hands of the very future he had tried to destroy.